screen and we'll start. Great. Well, welcome everybody to our April community call. We're so excited that you are here. I just learned about European Easter holiday, so I am envious. I am in the States. I am your one United States emissary, so I do not get 2 weeks off in the spring, and I'm ready to petition for it. But thank you all for joining today. So we do these monthly community project showcase calls. I think this is our third one that we've done, so these are still relatively new. But the goal is to feature members of the Your 2040 community, such as the amazing Marie-Claire Graf, who we'll hear from today, give people a chance to present on their work and give the other community members a chance to learn more about their work and ask questions and just build their network throughout the year beyond the gatherings. So we hope to keep these up over the next year. If you ever want to present, do message Kinney or I. We have an intake form as well that's very short and sweet, but we'd love to feature your work in these future calls. And today we're just so excited. I'm very excited to learn more about Marie-Claire's work as well, because I've heard only amazing things. So thank you for being here. Again, it's a small group, but tell your friends how much fun we have, and we'll keep these up for the next monthly calls. And before we get started on introducing Marie-Claire, I just will move along, and we'd love to just give a little refresh, have our hype video play of who is Your 2040, who are we, why do we gather? So if you haven't yet, we have this amazing promo video that was created, I think last year, Janelle, is that what you said? And so we've just been trying to circulate this more and start these calls with it to really ground us in the mission. So I'll get started here, and then we'll pass over to Chris for a quick intro.
Hey, you, come closer. Imagine being part of a community that's changing the world. That is Your 2040. But what is Your 2040 exactly? We are a growing group of over 1,900 creators, decision makers, and forward thinkers. We are artists, scientists, policymakers, consultants, entrepreneurs, and change makers. We are as diverse as the life on Earth itself. Every year we meet for 3 days. Today, we are here in La France. Our goal? To be the best ancestors we can be. We believe in a positive future, which is renewable in every way, where people, place, and nature live in harmony, where abundance is the norm. At Your 2040, we develop creative solutions and kickstart projects that drive our mission forward. Together, we inspire each other to accelerate change. Join us and participate in shaping a better future. Become part of our vision and see how your support can make a global impact.
That's great. Thank you. And I think if you haven't signed up for this summer, go ahead, Janelle.
Yes, I think Janelle, Chris, and I will be a combined voice and just saying, get your applications in if that gets you inspired. The applications are still open for the gathering, June 24th through 27th. Everyone can point their little fingers at you if you haven't applied yet. But do get your applications in and share with your network if you have folks that would be a great ad for this year.
Great. And I think that's my cue. Is that correct? Checking it out. So first of all, it's great to see everybody. Thank you so much for making time to be with us here. And I am so pleased and honored to be able to introduce Marie-Claire. You know, it's so interesting because there are few humans I know who are as active in promoting positive change as Marie-Claire. It seems like every time I see one of her posts or talk to her, she's just come back from a trip someplace to try to convince, to advocate for environmental justice, for making the world the best version of itself. And it's always inspiring to me personally to speak with Marie-Claire, and I always learn something I didn't know about her. So I'm really looking forward to today, and it's a great pleasure and an honor, Marie-Claire Graf, board member for Your 2040 and friend I invite you to the stage.
Well, thank you so much, and I'm very excited seeing you all, and thanks for taking time to delve a little bit into my work and the community I am working with. So I'm super excited to share a little bit. As we are a very cozy group, I would recommend that if you have any questions or if there's anything, you can either just raise your virtual hand because then you go on top of the stack and I see you immediately, or you're just putting it in the chat as well. And kind of like going over these next 45 minutes together. Well, I'm inviting you into my community. Your 2040 is one community, and I'm also part of many different communities in the multilateral world, more specifically in the environmental space. So this is basically the space where countries are coming together from around the world. And what is really beautiful is that it's like really, really, really diverse. So we have people coming from 200 countries together into these spaces. So I will and I also have like a couple of pictures, especially in the beginning, so you maybe like see a little bit that actually looks quite similar than the Your 2040 community. But of course, some of the underlying processes are quite different from what we're doing. Maybe a little bit about myself, because Chris gave me the challenge to say something which he doesn't yet know. But also for all the others who maybe do not yet know me that well, I thought I'm best illustrating my activism, my work through some of the pictures, and also showing how diverse the space can be and how many different avenues there also are for change. And I think that's maybe just to kind of also draw back to the Your 2040 community. I think that's what I find so beautiful about this community, that it's so diverse, and that we can also really live our diversity. So I have been an activist for a very long time, working on climate justice and environmental diplomacy, and doing this in many different forms, from kind of strikes and street movements, as you can see in some of the pictures, to very institutional politics. I have been the youngest negotiator for the government of Switzerland a couple of years back when I was younger than now, and have been working extensively with the Swiss government as an external advisor and negotiator. I have been working in many different youth movements, also internationally, to advance the work. And what I really love is kind of bringing the different communities together to ensure that they are cross-pollinating each other and nourishing each other, so we can kind of combined really do the resilience work we have to do, because of course no one can do it alone. And in the next how much time do we have in the next 30 minutes? I would love to give you a little bit of an insight into my community and why intergenerational multilateral collaboration is really crucial, and a little outlook in the year 2040 and how this community might look like in 2040, and what is kind of like some of the progression path to reach there. Happy to go like as deep as you wish into like an environmental diplomacy today and kind of the structure. Where I'm currently working at the Youth Negotiators Academy. We are doing 3 years course. It's basically like a bachelor's program. So I'm not taking you on this much of a ride, but also knowing that for some, it might already be common territory, whereas for others, it might be like a new role. So I put also quite some information slides together, so you can also like read through it on your own. At the end, I would love to talk a little bit about the work I'm doing with the Youth Negotiators Academy and the movement building and how people can actually access these spaces. Because if one of you maybe is more interested in kind of getting yourself into this space as well, and maybe like there are some interesting ideas. If you have any questions, just post them in the chat, please. I think we make this as community driven as possible, or raise your hand. Well, let's start 2040. So the UN has obviously, the United Nations has been also asking themselves through their member states, well, how should the world look like in 2040? They haven't chosen that much of a horizon. They landed at 2030, and you probably have all seen like these colorful bubbles or squares with the 17 goals. And this is kind of like the time horizon. That's where the UN and the countries are like aiming to through this agenda for sustainable development and the 17 sustainable development goals. They are really intending to cover all aspects around the social elements, the environmental elements, and also the economic dimension. And all the countries are or should work towards these goals. There's obviously a lot of things which are not on track. Every country is also producing their own reports where you can see how much they're on track or not on track. But that's kind of like the vision for the UN for 2030, and whatever comes next to where exactly will be 2040, we don't yet know. There's already conversations going on, as we obviously have only 5 more years to reach all these goals, like no poverty and hunger, equality, gender equality, reduce inequalities, but also end climate change, and so on. So like these are like massive tasks, and we will obviously not reach them all, but I hope that we can make substantive progress. So that's kind of a little bit the North Star, the compass, where the multilateral kind of world is heading to. And again, as mentioned, I'm mainly focusing on the environmental goals, which are the goals 13, 14, and 15. So it's climate change, life below water, and life on land. And I will go a little bit more into this as well. So, well, there was a big conference which was happening before I was born, 1992, the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development. Many of you maybe have been following or at least heard of it, but what I want to kind of like take from there are the so-called Rio Conventions, because this conference happened in Rio de Janeiro in Brazil. And very often these protocols, conventions are named after the city they have been kind of adopted. So that's why you will see lots of different names. It's always a good challenge for geography, so you can kind of like see where things have been happening. But yeah, basically that's kind of like the start of many of the environmental agency. Like there has been already some more scientific reports there, but it hasn't been that there was international effort by the countries of really working together to address some of the environmental challenges, which have been obviously already there way before 1992, but that was kind of the first time these efforts have been taken up. As already mentioned, as someone who works on climate change, I'm mainly spending my time with the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, or shortly known, this is kind of like the space where these annual climate talks are happening. You probably have heard about them. By the end of the year, there is always kind of like some communication about this. It's the second biggest conference taking place on Earth, which is probably not always the best indicator. But yeah, it definitely gathers a lot of attention, and it has been successful in some elements and not really successful in other elements. The main objective of it is to stabilize greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere, which has not been taking place. So it is still, or the convention is still working on doing this. Over the time, they have also been working not only to kind of mitigate the effects of climate change, but also to adapt, because they have been realizing that some countries, actually, I would say all the countries, are already suffering from often irreversible effects of climate change. So that's why adaptation, and then later on, even loss and damage, meaning things which cannot be adapted and are basically broken beyond the repair, have to be addressed. And there are obviously like a lot of very big questions coming up we as society have to ask ourselves. So how are we dealing, for example, with nations which have been completely flooded? So can someone have statehood without the land? And how do this kind of like work? And you probably all have heard about the main agreement, which is the Paris Agreement. Again, I told you it's a lot about geography. We had the Kyoto Protocol before, and then the Paris Agreement. Not going into like details, but if you have any questions, just post me in the chat. I can talk for a long while about this. But Chris reminded me to not do a lecture, so I will not going too much into detail. But what I would really love to share is that this is, while it's the most known convention on the environment, it's not the only one. There are actually like 2 sister conventions, which I think are really, really crucial, also for some of the work we're doing at the Year 2040 community. There is a convention on biological diversity, so they are working to promote, obviously, more biodiversity and kind of protect what needs to be protected, but also like ensure that there is more genetic diversity. And I think that's a very crucial aspect as well, because I think sometimes when we are like talking about climate change, we forget that it's a very interlinked system. and biodiversity aspects, as well as desertification and land-related matters, that they actually have been born together at the conference. And while they have now taken their own stances and their own work, I think it's really crucial that we're bringing all of this together again. I will later on come back to this when I'm talking about the work we are at the Academy doing, because we are basically like supporting that these conventions have new negotiators and new people who are coming into these spaces. But just give you a little overview that these are the three main conventions. Of course, there are many, many more. I listed a couple of them, and I'm not going to details, but if you're interested in any of them, let me know. And I think like the whole of it is kind of like a family, and what it serves is to give a platform for the countries to come together and peacefully negotiate with each other to overcome the challenge, because many, if not all of these environmental challenges are transboundary, meaning they are not within a country, but actually not even within two countries, but actually very often basically globally, as for biodiversity, land degradation, and also climate change. So that's why it's so important to, or like it's why I believe it's so important to invest in multilateral cooperation, especially when it feels very challenging these days, when we hear more of fragmentation and protectionism than working together. But unfortunately, these environmental topics will not follow our agendas, and I think it's very important that we are working together. And especially for the people who might not be that familiar with these multilateral spaces, I kind of like do a little breakdown on how this works. I already mentioned there are 200 countries coming together, meaning that you can already imagine it's going to be like a big mess. The biggest climate change conference had 100,000 participants. They're coming together for this main conference, which is happening normally by the end of the year. It's always rotating to different parts of the world. And so when you look into like, who are these people who are coming there and what is their role? So they are kind of like, they're kind of like four main groups down. So the first one, they're called parties. These are state representatives. So every of these almost 200 nations is sending a delegation where they are representing the interest of the government. And I mentioned, and also Chris has been mentioning, I have been part of this delegation for the government of Switzerland a couple of years ago. And so the role of these these delegations is to kind of like bring the interest of the country into these international forums, and then the intention is to kind of negotiate an outcome on how we can, for example, stabilize greenhouse gas emission, invest more in adaptation, enabling more climate finance, working with biodiversity, and any of these topics. So these parties, these state representatives, are the ones who are taking definitely all decisions. And what I think is quite beautiful, but it can also be challenging, is that it's a consensus vote. So all these spaces are running by consensus, means that every single country needs to not disagree with whatever is the outcome, which can be obviously very, very challenging. That's why these processes are like absolutely slow. That's why there's every year a lot of criticism that they obviously have to act faster, they have to be bolder, they have to do more, which I completely agree with. And the reason is because it's a consensus process. It's not a majority vote, or like there are many different possibilities on how one could theoretically vote. But yeah, that's the reason. So that's the first one. Then of course, this is all organized by the secretariats of these conventions. So all these conventions have some offices. Some of them are located here in Geneva, where I'm currently based, but they can also be all around the world. You probably also have read about the COP presidents, which have been some interesting figures in the last couple of years. Sometimes they have been business owners, for example, of the largest state-controlled oil companies. But basically, these are people who are appointed by the countries where the conference is being hosted. And as mentioned, these conferences are rotating around the regions in the world to ensure inclusivity and giving attention to all regions around the world, and kind of also observing like local impacts which are happening, in contrary to other processes which always have their conference, for example, here in Geneva at the United Nations headquarters. So it's just a different process. And the COP president is kind of preceding this meeting and inviting everyone and kind of like politically guiding through the process. And sometimes there's some very interesting findings, especially when there are lots of conflicts of interest. And then a very important group, and I know that many of the community, the Year 2040 community, actually have been also participating in these conferences already. Very often they do this as part of the so-called observer groups. This is basically everyone who is not one of the three above groups. And yeah, that's kind of the people who are not representing the government or the secretariat. They're so-called observers. They're called observers because they observe the process and they cannot take decisions. Decisions, as mentioned, is only is only allowed for the parties, only for the countries. So this can be civil society, NGOs, this is media, but also this is businesses. This can be like some youth networks, feminist groups, indigenous people, but also research and academia. And as I know, some of us are also from ETH, for example, ETH is also represented as part of civil society. So civil society is like a really big umbrella group where basically everyone comes in. So these are the four kind of like main stakeholders. This is a very complicated slide, but it gives you a beautiful overview on how messy the process can be. So the countries, I mentioned there are almost 200 countries, and they are all negotiating with each other to come to an agreement. And the fair question is, well, how does this work in practice? In practice, it does work that the countries do not negotiate on their own, but actually they're negotiating in groups. And this is kind of like a picture or kind of a visualization on these different groups and how this works. And as you can already see, there's a lot of overlap. And that's kind of like where all the negotiation strategies are coming in, and yeah, kind of like how the countries then are working. So for example, you can try to find your own country. Sometimes it's like quite easy because they're kind of groups which are called like the African group, which is probably like fairly easy, or the Arab group. Others are probably a little bit more difficult, and those are obviously like a lot of abbreviations in the space. We love abbreviations. We sometimes don't even understand ourselves. But yeah, so Switzerland, if you're looking for Switzerland, is in the on the right side in this green little corner, which is called EAG, which stands for Environmental Integrity Group. And it's probably one of the most fascinating groups, because it's, I will show you on the next slide, kind of like the position of Switzerland, because it's in between many different groups, and it's kind of like bringing different groups together. As you can see, Korea, Mexico, Georgia, Liechtenstein, Monaco, and Switzerland. But these groups are also showing different blocks of how the kind of the negotiation tension line goes. And you can see the biggest group here is the so-called G77 and China. Misleadingly, these are not 77 countries and China, but actually it's almost all the so-called developing countries, and it's actually 134 countries. And you can imagine if you have to pass something by consensus, so whatever the G77 and China are saying is kind of like giving the direction. But even within the G77 plus China, you will find a lot of different countries. So like very often, like they also struggle to come up with their own positions. So you can see that the negotiations are happening first on a country level, then it goes to the grouping level, and then it kind of like goes to overarching groupings. So yeah, it's kind of like a process in the process. Yeah, pretty wild. And especially when then all of this is kind of like to start as a machinery coming together. So it's a really fascinating space. I love it. But also I can understand if this slide already gives you a little bit of headache, then you will have like definitely a big headache once we are going into the negotiations. I will show you now kind of like one example. Again, you can take this for any other country. And yeah, so Switzerland is kind of like part of this group called Environmental Integrity Group, which is a really fascinating group, because I mentioned it's kind of like connecting a lot of different groups. And so they're basically like, if you like look at a little bit like black and white, they are two groups, the so-called annexed countries and the non-annexed countries. Why they're called annexed countries? Back in 1992, the world was divided in so-called developed and non-developed countries. They agreed to never update this list. That's why kind of the world is still stuck in 1992, which can lead to a lot of tensions and problems as well, because the world obviously has been developing over the past 30 plus years. And so the Environmental Integrity Group, where Switzerland is part of, is the only formal group which has countries from both sides, which obviously, as you can already imagine, is one of the big tension lines. So, for example, let's take the one of the most controversial topics around climate finance. So all the non-annex countries are the ones who financially benefit, and the Annex 1 countries, with a few exceptions, are the ones who are providing climate finance. So obviously, the non-Annex countries would always love to have more finances, very easily broken down, and the Annex 1 countries are trying to give like as little money as possible, but as much as necessary, so the process is still running. And that's like one of the absolutely massive tension lines, which if you have been following a little bit in the negotiations, has been one of the most controversial issues, especially over the last years, as the old goal on finance, which was very late in the process finally achieved, has been running out. So the countries had to agree on a new quantified goal on global climate finance, and they have been more or less finding a ground, which left a lot of countries really unhappy. And so Switzerland and the group where Switzerland is part of has been in a very strategic key position, because it kind of bridges these roles. So when the environmental integrity group is speaking, for example, when they say like on behalf of the environmental integrity group, we say XYZ, it means actually that there has been working on a bridge which can bring these two worlds together. And I find actually it's really relevant, especially in the times we are today, where it's a lot about division and not a lot about cooperation. And I also think that's something, which was our beautiful community at Your 2040 is kind of how can we bring these different roles together and unite. So that's why I wanted to ensure that you have like a little glimpse into this. The slide on the right side actually like shows the different kind of like it's a different visualization of how these countries and alliances are working, and it's like an interactive tool. So I put the link there. I can very much recommend you kind of like test it out so you can see how the countries work. And I think it's absolutely fascinating, especially if you're interested in geopolitics and how countries kind of work together or do not work together. And with this, I wanted to, because I really also want to leave lots of room for questions, discussion, but I wanted to talk a little bit about how civil society is engaging in this process. And I think there's also, if you haven't gotten a lot of headache so far, and if you decide to become active or you're at least interested, it's a good way to interact. So as mentioned, civil society is everyone who is not a party delegate, so is not representing a country or working at the secretariat. Within civil society, there are 9 groups. Don't ask me more details like why there are these 9 groups. They have been decided back in 1992, and they kind of came up that that's kind of like the cluster. They are some considerations to add more groups, for example, faith-based groups. But anyways, so you can like see the different nine groups. So for example, we have the RINGOs, which is very older researchers and independent institutions and NGOs are meeting. So ETH, for example, is a part there. Obviously, one of the biggest ones is the environmental NGOs. So all environmental NGOs can meet as part of this group. And I have been highlighting like the one for children and young people, because that's the one I have been most active in. And that's basically a huge group of young people who are working independently on their own, but also are engaging in the process. And so again, like these people, whoever is part of civil society, they are not able to take decision. Also, like seeing Chris's question on how is anything like being agreed. So civil society can only work through these, through the member states, through the countries to make their voice heard, because again, only the countries are taking the decisions. And that's one of the major barriers of a lot of beautiful ideas and research and intentions, which doesn't really make it to the negotiation tables and doesn't really influence policies, because very often these worlds are unfortunately quite divided. And that's also what led me to do the work I'm currently doing. Mentioning that back when I was actually a student at ETH, I got the offer from the former president of Switzerland to join the Swiss delegation, which is a quite closed group. And don't ask me how I exactly got there, because I don't know, but I was negotiating on topics of climate and gender, on climate technology, as well as capacity building for the implementation. And what I realized was that it's absolutely important to have more diversity and intergenerational leadership in these multilateral spaces, where we can come together and really innovate what kind of like kind of really harvesting the innovation, what is ongoing. But unfortunately, I was the only young person, not only in the Swiss delegation, but in my own negotiating tracks. And it can obviously be quite overwhelming. And it's very challenging to make, yeah, real impact and be meaningfully engaged and be effective. Because again, I had a lot of ideas, but it was just like really challenging. So after my experience to be a negotiator and have been leading as well a lot of work within the Secretariat and the United Nations to kind of consolidate the voices of young people, I decided to set up an academy which trains young negotiators from around the world, really bring transformative approach to these negotiations and kind of bring some leadership and some more intergenerational aspects to advance the work, which can be like quite stuck in these spaces as well. So basically, like how it works, we are working with almost 100 countries around the world, so with almost every second country in the world, to train their negotiators. So basically how it works is that we are reaching out to their ministries. The ministries are then nominating the people to us, and we are running the capacity building and the trainings for the diplomats. So ultimately it's a 3 years program, which I have been setting up, and it's kind of really helping young people from wherever they are to, after like 1 year or like after half a year, to have their first experience as a young diplomat, as a negotiator, as part of their government, to really have this seat at the negotiating table and not only be in an advising position and kind of not really getting through the decision making, because the ultimate goal here is to ensure that young people have a voice directly at the table where the decisions are taken, and to also just lead to more diversity. And then so we're kind of like really supporting this ecosystem, and you see a small group of some of our young negotiators from the last year's negotiations. You can see lots of happy faces. So that's the work I'm currently doing, but I will stop here just to leave some room for questions. And maybe I'm just stopping this screen. This is a very beautiful picture for questions, but I would love to also see some of the faces. And we can already pick maybe the question Chris has been posting, but also looking very much forward to see more of your questions.
Thanks so much, MC. That's an incredible tour de force. And again, I learned, I had never seen this multi-color, multi-stakeholder craziness map. That's,
Yeah.
I'm in awe of how anything gets done. 'Cause I know from other colleagues that they are, you argue over one word for like a day. And this is just, it's incredible. So I'm going to go ahead and ask a question if I can, because where do you get the strength to carry on with this? Doesn't this get like doesn't it just drive you crazy sometimes? Or exactly, it's a serious question, because I really wonder.
It is crazy. And I think it doesn't help that you basically are like there for like 2 weeks. You're literally landing in a space and kind of working some 20 hours a day. You're forgetting to drink, to eat. Like it's kind of like its own dynamic. So I like to say kind of like this love-hate relationship where I very much love it, because what I mentioned in the beginning, because I do believe that global problems and challenges need to be addressed globally, especially when we look at from a justice point of view. And especially to support the ones who are already on the front lines and has been causing the least or have been contributing the least to the problem, but now are suffering disproportionately. So we need to have these platforms to work together, and we need to have kind of like a structured approach as the United Nations is kind of like offering with this platform. On the other hand, it's really mind-boggling when we are there and people are kind of fighting over comma, over like, should it be like shall or should or could or welcome or note. I'm like, what? Like the climate doesn't care. Like this is physics out there, and it's hitting us already like so massively, and it will impact future generations who have absolutely no say in this process even more, right? And that's why I think, or like what motivates me to do the work. And I realized that as long as I'm just like kind of like this young person in a delegation, I will not make any change here, because the system is just like so big. And that's what then really sparked the interest to kind of create such an academy to train more of these negotiators. And we have been overwhelmingly successful, as we are working with almost every second country in the world, which we would have never ever imagined. And I think it also shows the deep interest to have better capacitated, especially young people in the process, and to rejuvenate a little bit also the process by bringing in new leadership and ensuring that we have more of this intergenerational approach. And I think that what gives me hope, coming back to your question, seeing how different generations can work together. And I very personally, I love nature and being just out in the wild. I love hiking. I love sailing. I love diving. I love to do everything to surround myself with the natural beauty, because I think it gives me the strength to kind of ensure that the voices which we often don't listen to are also represented and heard. And
that's really
ensure that future generations have the same beauty to enjoy.
Yeah, that's really fantastic. I appreciate that very, very, very much, Marie Claire. I echo your places for inspiration. It's people like you, but also nature that also inspires us. I have another question, and maybe others. I'm intrigued by the intergenerational aspect, because very often generations have different languages and different understandings of words and mores and values and expressions and how they even act and posture. What are some of the give some insights or lessons how we can be better intergenerational listeners?
Yeah, absolutely important point. And I think why I'm very consciously working on the intergenerational aspect is exactly because of this. We are diverse in our generations, and I do think we cannot overcome the challenges we are currently in if we are only kind of choosing that only a specific group of people can work on the topic. And what happens like so far is that there is a quite it's more older, it's a more male, it's a more kind of like it's a specific group of the population around the world which has access to these spaces. And I mean, I think that's part of why we have been failing in the past, because we haven't allowed the beauty and the diversity of the whole kind of humanity to come in, right, and provide its best to overcome the challenges, the different wisdoms. And we very consciously work on the skills. For example, if there is a difference between like a more senior negotiator and the younger kind of like negotiator coming in, so how can they commonly address the topics? How can we go beyond the positions which might be different? So how can we find our common interest and then kind of further deep dive to like, what is our common interest? Why are we here? Because very often there is a common interest. That's why we are in the space. And then go from there again and create opportunities and possibilities, and might, realize there is a disagreement, and that's fine, because that's kind of like also giving us a healthy space where we can find more options. So I think that it requires a lot of attention to details and the sensitivity of working across generations, but also taking a leap of faith that not all the older generations are just here to mess up our future, and not all the young people are here to kind of just deconstruct whatever former generations have been doing, because there has been a lot of goodwill and good intent. But sometimes maybe it also takes a leap of faith to try something differently again, to advance. Ultimately, I think we don't have another chance to do so. But I see Karel also has a question.
Yes, if I get myself unmuted. Thank you so much, Marie Claire. I have two questions. Actually, I have tons of questions, but two, maybe a short one and a lengthy one. My first one is, do you guys ever discuss to change this super hyper complex system? Is there like at every continent, every meeting you have like, oh, come on, let's change the system? That would be my first question. If you have like these surges and urges. And the second would be more like, what are the three great tips you can give for getting clarity or alignment, even in the smallest pieces? Is there any learnings you can share that we can use in our daily life when we have not so complicated systems?
Yeah, and I think like beautiful questions. Thank you so much, Karel. And on the complexity, I think like, what is really mind-boggling is that there are like so many different complexity layers coming all together. So it's kind of a complexity within the multilateral system. It's a complexity with climate change. but also the complexity with how countries are responding, and just having the stark inequalities around the world, which makes it so difficult. Like, who am I to say, oh, this country who has just been discovering oil shouldn't drill the oil? Of course, it's bad for the environment, but the country maybe just cares about immediate needs, that people are stuck in poverty and hunger. And I have never experienced poverty and hunger in my life. So I feel like it's like the deeper you go, the more complex the system gets. And it's, yeah, there's unfortunately not an easy answer to this, especially when we look at it from a point of justice. So we do train the skills with the young negotiators on dealing with complexity, and complexity in the cause itself and the topic we're talking about, but also complexity in how we are addressing this, especially because I feel if we kind of take these very shortcuts and kind of like, okay, you know what, that's my position and I want to just like, I think that's the right thing, that's exactly how we're not reaching a consensus agreement. Because then exactly we are running into challenges that which kind of barriers which we haven't overcome in the past, and I think that's why we are where we currently are. And for your second question, actually, like today, someone made a really beautiful slide, and let me see if I can share this now. Yes, I can share it. Beautiful. I gave an interview today about and it came back to me about this very beautiful slide, and I think it answers your question so beautifully, so I want to share it, about something which is not only relevant for the negotiations, but actually also relevant for everyday life. So this group of who are doing like a mock negotiation. So they have been asking me exactly the same question. So the first one was about preparation. So I think like preparation is really, really key. And it's not only about kind of like, as mentioned, like study the key documents and so on. But I think one of my biggest learnings is I don't have to understand my own position, but I have to understand everyone else's position and then figure out what is my position. And if we would all come from this mindset, I think the world would be a better place. We would have probably less conflicts in the world. And we can apply it also to our own life when we have an argument or when we have to negotiate something, right? So preparing, but also preparing from the other people's perspectives and not only from your own perspective. I think like something I have been really underestimating in the beginning is when I became a negotiator, I haven't asked any question for a whole week. And you would normally know I'm quite curious and asking lots of questions, but it can be really challenging. But in these spaces, it's really hard. A lot of jargons, a lot of procedures, abbreviations, and so on. So very often people are kind of just trying to avoid losing their face, so we are not asking questions. So yeah, kind of be encouraged to be curious and ask questions and break out of the habit of just staying back. Then I already mentioned before, and I think it also works, kind of if there is a bigger topic, kind of like really break it down and then go in smaller groups. Very often it doesn't work in the big groups. It's also why that I haven't talked about this now, but there are many different layers of how these negotiations work, from the big plenary to like small huddles and then kind of like go the way back up. And be really like frank and open to people. And I think the last element, which I think is really crucial, is being really sensitive about the language and knowing that different people have different meanings with different language, and have a curiosity to understand why people mean different things. And I think this is a really good reminder also of our personal lives when we are talking. So how can we share this curiosity? So yeah, probably or hopefully this is answering your question about the second part of your question.
Those are great, really great. I think Renato, you're up next. I think Emily, you should be.
Thanks. No, basically, I mean, I had basically a question, maybe more very big picture at the moment, clearly with US basically playing a very strange game. And but I saw, and I believe it's also run by the UN, and I don't know where exactly, but there is within the maritime field, no, they have, apparently there was an agreement, despite the very clear threats of the US that don't do it, there is $100 per ton of emissions that was agreed upon. And that led me basically, even though your slide looked quite crazy and very lengthy and cumbersome, again, to show to me that, yes, we absolutely need such world global setups, because if one country, clearly influential, goes crazy, then where else can we go to? And I just wanted to, it's a bit of a rambling question, but I don't know, certainly not clear in my mind. But I just wondered a bit what your reflections are, maybe how it is now, because you must be talking constantly with all your colleagues. How the hell do we deal with this elephant in a porcelain shop, to put it very mildly?
Yeah, thank you for this question. And definitely, I think what is also relevant is that geopolitical tensions in the world are impacting positively and negatively such very content-specific negotiations, right? You talked about oceans, the water, the seabed. There were like major decisions have been happening, and yeah, sometimes you have like the Paris Agreement was in a time, and many people said like today the Paris Agreement would no longer be possible because it was in a time where multilateral cooperation and collaboration was at the rise, and people really believed in it. And currently in the kind of world how it's currently are, as you've been describing, it probably wouldn't be possible. Well, I mean, two answers. First, there was already an era under the US president. He has already been kind of threatening to withdraw from the Paris Agreement. Ultimately, he couldn't do it like that fast because there are some clause in there. But of course, I mean, like, you know what? Just not do anything. The UN cannot enforce any country, also not the US or any other country in the world, to do anything, right? Because we always have sovereign member states. The only body within the UN which has any supreme kind of decision making is the Security Council, and this can only come in cases of war, of genocides, and so on. But you probably have heard of all the issues in the latest atrocities and genocides. For example, in Gaza, like how the Security Council is also like stuck in this regard. But that's the only organ within the UN who has any supreme decision making. So all the space I am working in, there is no supreme decision making, there is no sanctioning, there is nothing what you can enforce. So basically you have to appeal to the member states to please do their things. And of course, the whole process goes a little bit into like naming and shaming. But if countries don't care about being named or shamed, or even pride about being shamed, what's currently happening, it's obviously getting really tricky, because that was kind of like the mechanism which has been used. So again, like first, there has already been an era where as president, he has been withdrawing from the Paris Agreement, but ultimately not much happened. I think what was really beautiful to see that especially the states within the US have been kind of saying we are still in. We actually like want to have this transition because we care about our people, because we care about our industry. We don't want to like kind of lose out on it. We see like how other markets and other economies are booming, how other people are having like better like air, water, like fresh environments. So I think like it's an interesting things when kind of like some of the political leaders are politicizing the space more on a kind of a communication level to boost their popularity for like votes and elections and whatever. On the other hand, I think like I haven't gone into the scientific elements of it, but I mean, CO2 levels and greenhouse levels are still rising. Environmental pollution is on the rise, right? So we are not even like getting close to our targets, which does require more efforts from everyone, all the countries. And I think we as other countries have to just keep going and even kind of pull in like one gear more of delivering action when other countries are pulling back, because there is no question, right? We can always like, there are many different ways how we can reach the goal, but we cannot step out of the game. So yeah, that's probably maybe what I can offer, but definitely it's a big question in my head and in many other heads as well, Reto. And
maybe just one brief question around decision making. Is it always needing everybody to agree to everything, or is it also some of it majority wise? I mean, it's just, for me, it's like the big question. And it seems to be possible, as this maritime agreement last week, that even if the US is firmly against it, a lot of things can still happen. Now, clearly they will not agree, but it doesn't really matter because they don't have many ships, at least not registered under there, as an example. Because clearly in the Security Council, if they veto, that's just it. How is it on climate negotiations?
Thank you for the question. I mean, like the whole, like many different UN processes have many different ways of voting. Also, you might have been following the Plastics Treaty, which is a new treaty coming up. And the reason why they couldn't finish the meetings and actually like release this convention or adopt the convention was because they couldn't agree on how they're voting. So you can already see there's a lot of contentious issues around how we're voting, because obviously countries are fearing if you're doing votes on majority that they will kind of lose out on it. But quick question, in these environmental treaties, everything is run by consensus, meaning every country, like it's not exactly like they have to agree, but at least do not have to disagree. The one is the consensus and one is the consent, right? So the country doesn't need to give consent, but they have to give consensus. It's a tiny little difference, but you can argue like sometimes a country doesn't agree with the approach, but they think like it's not important enough to kind of disagree, or they get something else in another area, and that's where negotiations are then coming in. But yes, everything is run by consensus, and that's why it's like so slow. That's why it's not a really innovative process. But others, like the United Nations General Assembly, they're running on majority votes or 2/3 votes, and so on. But let's take also like Eric's question before we're wrapping up the call.
Hey, hi everyone, good to see you all. I'm just curious, maybe to hear a little bit your impressions on how the negotiations have developed during the last years. I mean, right, in a sense, we're getting to a more extreme situation year by year. So in a sense, they should force decisions as well.
Yeah, so no, there cannot be any forced decision, even if like, climate change is, I mean, like there were country representatives who have been crying because, storms have been devastating like half of their island and half of their lands, right? Or like land is gone and things have been happening, but you cannot force. There's no supreme force. The force comes with the unity of these almost 200 countries who are agreeing by consensus. I know it's quite mind-boggling, but that's how the process works. Regarding change, there has been massive change on many different levels, but just to kind of like cut it short, I think I did mention that very initially the convention was only about mitigating the effects of climate change, which kind of, okay, we have to reduce greenhouse gas and then it's good. In the process, they realized, well, first, we have not been successful enough, and second, there are already like a lot of impact. So we have to adapt and protect ecosystems and humans for the impacts. And then they realized, well, that's also not enough. We actually also have to figure out what are we doing with loss and damage when, for example, islands are gone and so on. So this is a massive change. And of course, some countries prefer to not talk about loss and damage because it also comes with liability questions on our historic emissions and their role in it, right? Also like Switzerland's role and many other countries' roles. So that's maybe like a quick roundup to this question. It has been a big, big, big pleasure to share a little bit about my bubble and my community. And if anyone has any questions, you have my contact details. So very happy to take it forward. And for the ones being at any of the conference, I would love to connect. And looking forward to seeing you in the summer. Over to you, Chris, Janelle, Emily.
Bye-bye.
Chris, you're muted.
Oh,
All right, I tried to unmute myself and then I got muted. There you go. So thank you so much, Mary Claire. I'll say a very quick personal thank you for that. Again, I always learn, and you didn't let me down very much. My admiration just goes up always, and thank you very much for your steadfast dedication and your clarity. It's really fantastic. So thank you for that for me. And with that, then it's over to Emily.
yay. Thank you so much, Marie Claire, for featuring so much great work. If anyone has other questions after this or wants to find you at the event, how should they best get in touch with you?
Just text me on WhatsApp. I'm in all the groups. I've been tagged a couple of times, so just shoot me a direct message.
Awesome. Thank you. I know my head is still reeling from like all these grids. Like I'll have to drop a question there if I need to. But thank you so much. And of course, thank you as well to Kinney, who's on this call, for all of the logistics of making these community calls happen. Just so you all know, our next one will be the 20th of May. So put this lightly on your calendar now. Might already be on there if you saved the Google Calendar event from this event to your calendar. So please join us again in this community project showcase call. We are going to still be sourcing our speaker, our featured speaker for this, but it will be incredible once we get there. So again, you'll expect awesome talkback, learning more with the Your 2040 community, chances to ask questions, and hopefully spark new collaborations. And this is also coming up the month before the gathering. So in June, you can look forward to a pre-event call for the gathering where we'll talk about any of the questions there and just get excited to gather in person. So that's all from me. I'll close out. Thank you again from everyone, and thanks for joining, and we'll see you in the WhatsApp in the meantime.
Thanks,
Thank
Emily.
you.
Thanks,
Bye.
everybody.
Bye.